Out of the Woods, a true story of an unforgettable event by Rebecca Bond. Whoa, there's so much animals. Antonio Willie Gurnix lived in Ontario, Canada, in the town of Goganda, on the edge of Goganda Lake, in a hotel with his mother Rand. It was not a fancy place in 1914, but it was a big 3 stories tall. There weren't many children to play with, so Antonio made friends with hotel workers. He knew the daily routines of cooks, the maids, and the hired men who stroked the stoves. He maintained the building. The ground floor of the hotel had a large opening space for eating, with the kitchen at one end. Antonio slept in a room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry. The second floor had rooms for travelers passing through, and outdoor sportsmen who would stay for a few days to fish or hunt. Antonio liked to peek into these rooms when the doors were open. Even though they had warm, dry beds and woolen blankets like his own, these rooms were much more interesting. They also had gas canvas, travel bags with many pockets, nets and poles for fishing, and sometimes even guns. But the top floor was Antonio's favorite one, great room lined with rows of bunk beds. It was where the men who worked in the forest, trampers, lumberjacks, and silver miners lived for months at a time. Here it smelled wonderful of sweet tobacco and wood, wool and leather, and sweet here. Antonio could listen French and English and Native American languages, sometimes all spoken at once. Surrounding the hotel was a dense forest, mostly cheddar pine, blossom, and poplar trees. When Antonio walked through the forest, he heard a bay of wolves getting ready to chase deer, saw the tracks of the foxes hunting mice, and noticed the signs of a bear, moose, and a weasel. Fur rumbled off the bark, a sleeping impression in the earth, a hollow log lined with a dry grass. These half-glimpses were never enough for Antonio, but he also knew that in Gonganda, with its trampers, hunters, and lumberjacks who made all trees crash to the ground, the safest place for animals was a distant, hidden one. When Antonio was almost 5, the summer was so dry, green campers of moss yellowed, the silky grass crisped, and the pine needles of the trees turned brittle. One day, a miner on the 3rd floor spotted smoke in the hills and sounded the alarm. Antonio knew they were all in danger. The news spread fast. The fire spread faster. Antonio watched as the wind pushed the fire in every direction. He heard a roar like a monster and a crackle with lightning heat. Soon there was only one place to go. All the people of Gondina, hotel guests, trampers, lumberjacks, silver miners, cooks, maids, hired men, Antonio's mother, and Antonio went into the lake. There were There was even a baby, not half-year old, held in his mother's arms. They stood in the water, up to their knees, their waists, their shoulders, and started. The fire came closer. All the people and then through all the smoke and flames, Antonio saw something remarkable. Out of the forest into the lakes came foxes, rabbits, bobcats, and raccoons. Wolves appeared, and deer, and moose, porcupines, and elks, squirrels, possums, even some bears. Antonio watched all the animals came out of the thickets and down from treetops and stood in Gondina Lake as the forest around them burned. Wolves stood beside deer, foxes beside rabbits, and people and moose stood close enough to touch. Antonio smelled the steam rising off the animals' wet fur, saw their chests lifting and falling in steady rhythm, and felt their hot animal breath. Antonio didn't know how long everyone stood there, but it was like several days. The fierce fire and smoke made the sky so black that no one could tell whether it was day or night. Finally, the monsters stopped roaring. The red flames blew themselves out. The black sky turned to cardinal gray, heather gray, and then almost blue. It was safe, at last, to leave the lake. Antonio went back sleeping in the room in the next to the kitchen. Hotel guests still had rooms on the second floor with warm, dry beds and woolen blankets. The trampers and lumberjacks and miners returned to their bunks on the third floor. Antonio continued to live in Gondia for the next 10 of his years for his life. He stayed with friends and the cooks, the maids, and the hired men. Listened to the stories told by lumberjacks, and sometimes he went fishing with the fishermen. He swam through the cold lake, but Antonio never forgot the fire or the people all up to their waists in the water. Mostly he never forgot how he watched the distance between animal and the people disappear in the summer of 1914 when he was almost 5 years old. It's not fun to have wildfires, but that was an unforgettable event.